Now let's get started 3D modeling our scene. I know I created this blockout right here, and you can use this if you want, but I'm actually going to recreate all the objects in this blockout and then all the actual final scene objects from scratch. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make myself a box. And this box is going to serve as the base of our level. Right now, I want to make sure that it has a good, solid, round number for the length, the width, and the height. And remember, we're working in centimeters, so let's make this something like 500 centimeters high and probably 250 centimeters in the width. And then the length is going to be, let's make it 1,000 centimeters. Okay. Now, let's grab our little player character over here and see how big that actually is. So if we just grab and align them, bring them up here. Now, this is how big our player is going to be, and we're saying that this entire segment right here, which is going to be one screen, is this big. Well, that doesn't really look right, so we need to make this a little bit bigger. So let's say 5,000 centimeters. And that looks maybe a little bit too big. A lot of this time is going to be spent kind of like figuring out the dimensions of your level. And now, because we're working from a simplified concept art that is going to be redundant and tiled, we have a little bit of leeway with a certain amount of size. If you're working with a specific level designer that has specific size dimensions for your hallways, that's different. But we're going to do this a little bit more freeform. Let's try 2,500. That looks good. And also our width, let's say that's going to be 500. And then our height, let's say that's also going to be 2K. Perfect. Now what's going to happen is if we go to our left view and go over there, actually I think 2,000 is a little bit too big. Let's go with 1,500. Nope. All right. Now this is going to be good because if our character is running along here, or if they're going to kind of like come over here and jump down a pit, then for a good amount of the scene, until we move to a new tile, there's actually going to be floor there, so it looks like the scene is completely populated. And the next thing I want to do is make this feel a little bit less flat, so it doesn't look like they're just running on, a completely flat surface. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab our box, that's our floor, and I'm going to convert it to an editable poly. I'm going to grab my edge tool, and I'm going to chamfer the edge. And let's see, let's chamfer it by 50 centimeters and see how that looks. Yeah, that looks nice. So if I go back to my left view, that'll actually help catch some of the light and will make it look like it's more three-dimensional. So good. And because we're never actually going to be seeing the sides of our box, or the back of our box, or the bottom of our box, we can actually just delete them. All right. Now, in Unreal 4, we'll actually be able to just... Oh, I have to reset my snaps toggle. Now, in Unreal 4, we'll actually just be able to take these guys and snap them apart so that we can create a long level. And actually, we're going to be able to grab these guys and we can make some pits, which will be really useful for creating a lot of third dimension to our game. And also what we're going to do is we're going to make some corner pieces so that we can have some different intersections. So let me just get rid of these for now, and we'll come back to that in a minute. Now I can also use this floor piece as my ceiling piece, so I'm actually just going to grab it and rotate it 180 degrees. And right now I'm just going to pull it up there. We also need to make a background for our scene, because otherwise it'll just look off into the abyss. So let's make a plane really quick. Okay, so let's say it's going to be 1250 by 750. Rotate it in the back here. And then I'm going to snap it. Now, the reason I don't want it to be the entire length of our object up here is that we want to be able to use a texture that's going to tile across the background. And we don't want it to be too big and we don't want it to stretch, so if we do it in squares, it's actually a little bit more convenient. And we don't need any of these lines here, so I'm just going to set my length and width segments to 1 and 1. And I'm just going to snap this guy down here. Alright, now that's going to serve as our background. We can also bring this guy down and snap him right there. Now if we look from our left view, we have a very simple block out of what our level is going to be. Actually, I'm looking at these garish kind of pink and purple colors, so I'm just going to tap M on my keyboard to open up my material editor, and I'm just going to color these with base grain material. And then I'm going to grab my objects and come up to the little box that's going to be up here. Whatever color your box was is the color that's going to be up here. So I'm just going to grab these guys, except for Bob, and I'm going to set it to black so that our wires are black. Alright? So now that we have a very base simplified version of what our floor and our ceiling is going to look like and what our background planes are going to be, if we take a look at our concept art, we know that we have like this second level of our ceiling here. So I actually want to make that next. So I'm going to make another box. That was kind of drawn behind our object over here. Now it only hangs down a little bit, so this doesn't need to be, this is way too big. Let's see how big this is here. Cool. And let's make this something like 150 by 150. I'm going to bring this guy up here. Alright. So this will be able to give us some cool shadows behind here when we set up our girders. Now let me go to my left view again and take a look at that. I think it needs to go up a little bit. Right there, very good. Now, I also want to just quickly chamfer that edge so that the edge will be able to capture some light and give it again, a more three-dimensional look. If you haven't noticed, there's a bit of a theme going on here. So let me chamfer him right here. $25 is good. And again, we're never going to see the sides of this guy or the top of him or the back, so we can just erase those or delete them. And I'm also going to make my wires black and then give it a gray material. There we go. Cool. Alright, so now we've got our top, bottom, background, and our little girder piece right there. So I don't need my material editor anymore. And one of the things that's kind of bothering me right now is I have my view mode set to realistic, so it's trying to make all these shadows and ambient occlusion, and it's kind of just getting in the way of seeing what I'm looking at. So I'm just going to come up here and set it to shaded. That's a little bit easier to look at now. Now the next thing I want to make is this big steel beam in the back here. So it looks like it's kind of just like one box on top of another box, so pretty easy to make. So I'm just going to make myself a box. Now the cool thing about some of these objects that don't need to be mathematically perfect is that we can kind of, be a little bit, not lazy, but a little bit more creative with them. So I'm just going to bring this guy down here. And I'm going to center him to approximately where the seam for our two background pieces is. And this is one of the reasons that we actually are using this guy, is to cover up the background seam. And I'm just going to place him down here. And I'm just going to reduce the height. And the width is pretty good. Cool. So I'm going to convert this guy to an editable poly. And again, I'm going to delete the hidden polygons because we can use these polygons that we're saving in other areas, whether it be for drawing more enemies on the screen or just using that computer power for other things. I'm going to chamfer these guys. And the reason I'm doing this again is so that we can have some nice three-dimensional elements to our objects and also show off that we're catching the light when our objects are hit with light. Also going to grab my edge tool, and I'm going to grab our top and the bottom of our box, and I'm going to hit connect. And I'm going to set this to 2 segments, and I'm going to move the pinch up. And the reason that I'm doing this, again, is so that we can get that inner beam that's going in here. We're going to handle all these bolts and stuff simply by using the texture inside of Photoshop. I'm not actually going to spend my time placing and modeling all these bolts. So, extrude. A little bit too far out. Let's bring that back a bit. Cool. And then I'm going to go to my edges, and I'm going to chamfer these edges. Alright, and then I'm going to, again, go to my material editor and color this guy gray. Alright, so we're really making some headway with this scene. We've got a lot done already. Next thing I think we're going to handle is we're going to handle these background strut elements. And that'll give us something really good to help us make the scene feel really cohesive. Alright, so the next thing that we're going to work on is those struts in the background. So if you look at our concept art, there are these X pieces in the back. You see these a lot in like warehouse and factories and everything, and they kind of just are really synonymous with industrial development. So we're going to make these. Now we're going to use them a couple of times, multiple times across our scene, so we actually only have to make one and we can just reuse them in different places. So they go from the floor to the ceiling, and then they have this little box around them. So let's get started working on those guys. So, once again, we're going to work with a box. And I'm just going to bring them right here. And I'm just going to scale them down. I don't want them to be too thick, though. I don't want them to be about the same width as a person, so I'm going to scale them down a little more, make them a little bit thinner. And I'm going to bring them back over here, just because they're going to be up against the wall. Actually, I think that I do want them to be a little bit thicker. And then they are canted at a 45-degree angle. Bring them to 45 degrees. And now we actually have to make them a little bit longer, so make sure that they reach the top and the floor. So I'm going to go back to my scale tool, and I'm going to switch to my local axis. And it's going to scale them up. Switch this to local so we can move them down. Perfect. That looks good. And the next thing I'm going to do is first I'm going to switch back from local to view, and there we go. So we're moving in our world space view. And then I'm going to convert these guys to an editable poly. And I'm going to delete the back side of these guys right here, because again, we're never going to see them. Do it right down here as well. And I'm going to then also bevel these edges right here. And the next thing I want to do is I want to actually just, make it so that there's an X piece here, and we can actually just use our same mesh here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my hierarchy tab, and I'm going to center the pivot to my object. So right there, and then we could just take this guy and hold shift and drag along to make a second object. Now it doesn't really matter that they're intersecting right here because that's going to be covered up by that little square strut piece. And actually to make that we're going to need another box. So here's our box. I usually just draw it in at a random size first and then deal with it afterwards, figuring out what I'm going to actually make the size of it. I never really try and make the box the perfect size on the first time, because I never can. So I've given up trying. Scale them down. So at this point, you could probably guess the steps that I'm going to be taking while I'm working on these pieces. So now that we have our box in the appropriate size and the appropriate space, I'm going to convert it to an editable poly, and I'm going to delete the back face right here. I'm going to delete the back face right here. And then I'm going to chamfer all these edges. Chamfer. There we go. And you know what I'm also going to do is I'm also going to chamfer these side edges as well, just a little bit, just so they're not so sharp. I find that sharp edges really kind of give away when things are video games. They kind of just make it feel like it is, a 3D CG object. And then, because I don't want this to be more than four-sided, I'm going to use my connect tool, and I'm just going to connect these edges here. Now, if you're unsure of if your objects have more than four sides, because sometimes it looks like they only have four sides, but you get a little confused, or you might have like a floating vertex in there. What you can do is, if you're using 3ds Max 2010 Plus, you can actually just select your polygon selection mode and come up to Selection, click that, and all the way in the right they have this binumeric. So you can actually say, hey, if there's more than four sides, select that. And it's going to actually select any face on our object that has more than four sides. If you're looking for triangles, you can say less than four sides, or if you're looking for things that have a specific number of sides, I usually just set it to look for more than four sides, and it'll highlight your object. So if we actually take this guy and connect our vertexes, we can double check, and hey look, there's no more faces on here that have more than four sides. So perfect. And then again, I'm going to assign my gray materials to these guys. And I'm going to color the objects black so they have black outlines. There we go. Very nice. Now, I'm actually looking at our objects here, and then I'm referencing our concept art, and I'm noticing that the bottom of the struts kind of just end in the floor, and that doesn't look really well. Things aren't constructed like that. There's probably going to be something on the ground where these are plugged into. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to our edge tool, and I'm going to select all the edges, and I'm going to hit connect, and I'm going to set my segments to 2. I'm just going to move these out and hit OK. I'm going to go to my polygon tools. I'm going to extrude something out here. So it looks like it's kind of buckled into the floor. And since we changed one of these objects, I'm just going to delete this one and just reduplicate this one. And now I can actually just grab these guys and just yoink them over, hold shift and drag, place them over here. And there we have our two sets of struts. So if we look at from our side view, that's looking really nice. All right. So the next thing I think I'm going to do is I'm going to do the platform in the center of our scene right here. So when we come back, we're going to handle that piece.